Hello, and welcome to the Long John Podcast with your host, Joseph Camperman. Welcome, everyone, to episode 4 titled Sports Mania. First of all, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who has supported me thus far. I am now a month into this podcast, as well as my weekly news sports report featured on my Instagram page, the Long John Podcast. Check it out if you have not done so already. I cannot be more thankful for all the support that you guys have shown me thus far, and I'm going to continue to put out some great content over the next couple of months and into the future, especially with some exciting news that I will be having some guests on my show starting in the month of April. I'm really excited to kick this off, and I'm going to get into topic number 1, titled NFL Free Agency Update. So this is going to be a large portion of the next month and a half in particular of any show that you look at. I mean, everyone is focusing on the NFL draft and the NFL free agency period because ultimately those are your two biggest topics until it comes to the season schedule, which drops at the end of April. So getting into this topic, obviously the busy part of the NFL free agency period is over. That typically lasts anywhere from a week to 2 weeks, where you see a large portion of your big name free agents sign large deals, and a lot of teams end up using a lot of their cap space on some of these big free agents. Because ultimately, your thought is, if I could get a star at a position, I can strengthen my team, and hopefully that can be the step that leads my team to success and ultimately the Super Bowl and hopefully winning it. But as I said in last episode and previous episodes, sometimes those flashy moves aren't the moves that get you to the Super Bowl. In fact, some of the not so flashy moves sometimes tend to be the best. So we have some still pretty big names out there that are free agents to keep in mind, and a list of them are wide receiver Odell Beckham, running back Ezekiel Elliott, edge Ngakoue, edge Frank Clark, edge Jadeveon Clowney, cornerback Rock Ya-Sin, offensive guard Dalton Reisner, defensive lineman Chris Wormley. I did say in my Sunday news report that safety Taylor Rapp was a free agent, but he has recently, as of today, signed with the Buffalo Bills. That's a big signing. And finally, to finish off this list, cornerback Marcus Peters. Now, I will preface this by saying this is a short list of people and a long list of still available free agents. I just picked some top names, and I'm going to dive right into where I believe their landing spots will be. So for wide receiver Odell Beckham, this is an interesting one. He hasn't played football in over a year. Obviously, the last time he took a snap in the NFL was in the Super Bowl where the Los Angeles Rams played the Cincinnati Bengals. So, yeah, it's been over a year. By the time he actually takes the field for actual games is going to be preseason. It's going to be over a year and a half of not playing football. So that may be scaring some teams off, but he's still a talented wide receiver, and really he's still more talented than a lot of teams probably want to admit, because he's going to provide you more of assurance than a rookie receiver, and he's definitely one of the better veterans out there. The only difficult part with him is you just don't know what form he's going to return in, but it seems to be that there is still a list of teams that are interested in him. So the 3 teams that I have listed right here for Odell Beckham is Kansas City Chiefs. They lost Juju Smith-Schuster and Mecole Hardman, both great receivers for them last year that, whether people like it or not, contributed at some point in the season. And I would say Kansas City is definitely a top name out there. Number 2, Buffalo Bills. Even though the Bills do have Gabe Davis and they have some other receivers that may be able to contribute, they're still lacking a solid wide receiver 2 or 3, and Odell Beckham would provide not just veteran presence, but also a tremendous amount of experience, even in big games. And my third team for Odell Beckham is New York Jets. The possible Aaron Rodgers to Jets news that we think is going to happen could definitely lure Odell as a chance for potentially championship ring chasing. The thing is I really see Odell sort of signing a 1 or 2 year deal, and I just don't know if the Jets are going to be at championship caliber in 1 year. The only thing is we don't even know how long Aaron Rodgers is playing for, so that's a big up in the air situation. So my pick for Odell Beckham is he signs a 1 year prove-it deal with the Chiefs. I think he's at the age right now where he could sign one more 1 year deal and maybe net a 3 year deal to finish off his career, or signs one year deal and retires. if he gets a ring. He already has one ring with the Los Angeles Rams, but another ring, I'm sure he wouldn't pass that up. So number 2 on the list are Ezekiel Elliott. So he released last week a wish list per se. A lot of people thought it was teams interested. It was quickly come out and said, no, this is his wish list. That was New York Jets, Philadelphia Eagles, and Cincinnati Bengals. I will say the New York Jets have Breece Hall, who was, arguably on pace to become the offensive rookie of the year before his injury. I just don't see running back Breece Hall being 100% at the start of the season. And because of that, Ezekiel Elliott could definitely fit in there. It's just whether or not the Jets want him. Now, the Eagles are the second on his wish list. They signed Rashad Penny and Boston Scott to pair with Gainwell and Trey Sermon. I just don't see the Eagles getting him, and the reason why is because the Eagles did, many years ago, sign another running back. Of course, a lot of Eagles fans are familiar with the signing of DeMarco Murray. At the time, it was a super popular signing. A lot of Eagles fans were really going crazy, including myself, because he was really at the still coming off a very good career and very good seasons that he had accumulated with Dallas. But that did not go well. And I think ever since then, a lot of Eagles fans are like, stay away from Dallas running back. So I don't see this happening. It would be a shocker to me. My third and final team is the Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals look like the likeliest scenario, as they did lose Samaje Perine in free agency. My pick is that he signs a 1-year deal with the Bengals. I could see the Bills as potentially a flyer for a running back, even though they did go out and get Damian Harris in free agency. It still leaves them with a bruiser that they could use on goal line situations. That's a real flyer, though. My pick right now has the Cincinnati Bengals as replacing him. The only thing that he does not offer that Perine did offer was that he doesn't have as good after the catch ability. And that could pose a question if you're running a pass-heavy offense like Cincinnati does. Do they really even need him? Well, moving on to edge Yannick Ngakoue. He has bounced around between the Colts, the Jaguars, the Raiders, the Vikings. The Ravens. He's had bounced around between many teams. He's still a very good edge rusher, but the problem is the edge rusher market is quieted down. He's not going to net a big deal. My guess is a lot of these players I'm talking about only net 1-year deals in hopes to cash in free agency next year. The 3 teams that I have potential is for the Colts, the Bears, and Seattle. My pick would ultimately be Seattle. I think he provides definitely some veteran presence on a line that could, that just went out and got a defensive lineman from the Broncos. So he definitely strengthens the position, I believe, of need. But this could really go either way. I think the Bears could potentially, bolster their D-line again, and the Colts obviously could look into bringing him back. Moving on to edge Frank Clark. So Frank Clark has also had, an interesting career with the Chiefs and the 49ers and the Seahawks. And so I could ultimately see Frank Clark picking one of 3 teams. And those 3 teams are the Minnesota Vikings, the Detroit Lions, and the Los Angeles Rams. So one of the things is the Detroit Lions this year lost edge Austin Bryant, but signed edge John Kaminsky to a 2-year deal. It's not a very high deal, and I could still see them bringing in a defensive end to pair alongside Aiden Hutchinson. I mean, as you guys all know, Aiden Hutchinson had a phenomenal year, but pairing him with a veteran talent like Frank Clark, I think would be a really, really good move. And I think that honestly what it really boils down to is whether or not Detroit wants to go out and spend money on a guy who they may only have for 1 year. But Frank Clark really does have a serious, in my opinion, he has a really good ability to bring some talent to that defensive position. And I was actually wrong. Frank Clark did not play for the 49ers or the Seattle Seahawks. For the 49ers. He played just for the Seahawks and the Chiefs. That was my mistake. And so, I could see ultimately Frank Clark picking someone else, but right now I have Frank Clark going to the Detroit Lions just because I think Detroit is really trying to bolster that defense. Their offense last year didn't have any problem putting up points, but that defense definitely struggled. So moving on to Another edge, Jadeveon Clowney. He's a big name. He's bounced around between the Houston Texans and the Cleveland Browns. I never really felt like he really got it going versus the Cleveland Browns. I mean, when he's healthy, he's an absolute menace. But he was such a dominant player with the Houston Texans. But he just never got. I don't know. He did a lot of things for the Cleveland Browns, but not enough in my opinion. And he's definitely not going back to the Browns after they cut him. So the three teams that I have listed right here are the Chicago Bears, the Houston Texans as a reunion, or the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati has, all of these teams, definitely need to improve their pass rush. I have him going right now to the Chicago Bears. I think the Chicago Bears desperately need to improve their pass rush. And I think if they want to really give their quarterback a chance to succeed, making him put up 40 points every game in order to win games is something that I would definitely advise strengthening that defensive position to prevent having to put up that many points. And ultimately, they've already made moves in free agency for their defensive players. So wouldn't be shocked to see them go that route again. Moving on to my first defensive back that I'm focusing on is ex-Las Vegas Raider cornerback Rock Ya-Sin. The three teams that I have him going to, one of the three, Cincinnati Bengals, Baltimore Ravens, and Jacksonville Jaguars. So, of course, the Cincinnati Bengals just went out and signed Sidney Jones as more of a veteran presence. The Ravens have signed cornerback Trayvon Mullen, and the Jacksonville Jaguars have re-signed cornerback Trey Herndon. Now, I will say this. All of those guys are all veterans. My thought is that due to the fact that Eli Apple and Trey Flowers are both still free agents who played for the Cincinnati Bengals, my pick is that Rock Ya-Sin goes as a veteran cornerback to the Cincinnati Bengals to strengthen an area that is going to need strengthening this year. Now, he's not a flashy cornerback pick, but he would definitely provide experience in an area of need. Moving on to my first offensive lineman, Dalton Risner. So Dalton Risner played for the Broncos last year. I thought he was going to net a bigger deal or have a team before now, but he's not. So the three teams that I have potentially looking into him is Seattle Seahawks, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the San Francisco 49ers. Now the difficult part is, does he take a one-year deal and go to Tampa on a cheap deal because Tampa is in desperate need of an offensive lineman or especially offensive guard? Or does he go with someone like the 49ers for a ring chasing? Or does he take probably a middle-of-the-road deal and go to somewhere like Seattle? Well, my pick is he takes the middle-of-the-road deal. Seattle needs inside O-line. I think he signs a deal with Seattle. May only be a one-year deal, maybe a 2 or 3 year deal, similar to something like Isaac Seumalo signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But that is where I have him going. Moving on to a defensive lineman, Chris Wormley. So the three teams that I have Chris going to this year are New Orleans Saints, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Detroit Lions. All three of those teams ranked really horribly in the sack stats last year. I have him going to Minnesota. If you looked at anything that you could pick, if you picked one thing that you could attack the Minnesota Vikings for last year, would be in the playoffs. Their defense was absolutely lackluster. I think they signed a good defensive lineman in Wormley. He strengthens an area of definite need, and that's where I have him going between those three teams. My final player to focus on this topic is cornerback Marcus Peters. This is a very, very interesting one. Marcus Peters is obviously a free agent. He could return back to the Baltimore Ravens, but I think because of the Lamar Jackson situation, there's so much up in the air. I think Marcus Peters is going to take his talents elsewhere. The three teams that I have listed here are the Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Minnesota Vikings, again, and the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the Las Vegas Raiders did sign Brandon Facyson, but I still think it still leaves them with a need at cornerback. And so that is a definite real possibility. The Minnesota Vikings, a team that was terrible at defensive back last year. They did go out and sign defensive back from the Arizona Cardinals in Byron Murphy, but I still doesn't solidify a position that I think desperately needs to be solidified. Byron Murphy's going to be a good starter, but it still leaves them with other positions of need, including opposite Byron Murphy. My pick is that he goes to the San Francisco 49ers. And here's the deal. The San Francisco 49ers look like legit Super Bowl contending teams again this year. My thought is it may be a very short window. If you're Marcus Peters, you take a small, cheap 1-year deal, sign with the 49ers. You're gonna have a good season because that defensive line is absolutely stacked along with all linebacker core. You're going to be getting a lot of quarterbacks who are under pressure, throwing bad passes. I think he nets a small deal with the San Francisco 49ers, and the 49ers bring in a star cornerback. So that's it for that topic number one. It's definitely a lengthy topic, something that I could continue to focus on, but I'm going to move into topic number two, Eagles free agency update. So as you guys, if any of you have read my weekly sports news report, on Tuesday, the Eagles announced the signing of linebacker Nicholas Morrow, who previously played linebacker for the Las Vegas Raiders and last year for the Chicago Bears. Unfortunately, Morrow spent all of 2021 on the injury reserve, and so really the only sample size we have of games that he's played is, well, in the last 2 years, is last year's season where he racked up 116 tackles in 17 games. That's quite good for a player who spent the previous season on injured reserve. This definitely provides obviously some clarity on who is going to be starting alongside the Eagles linebacker Nakobe Dean, who they drafted in the 3rd round last year out of Georgia. I loved that draft pick last year, but he didn't get much playing time. But from the little playing time that Nakobe Dean got last year, he looked like a future star in the making. Morrow would ultimately Morrow would provide a lot of would solidify an area that was definitely needed. Hassan Reddick plays one linebacker position. Nakobe Dean ultimately would play the middle linebacker, and Morrow would come in and play the position that Kazir White and TJ Edwards played last year, more so Kazir White. Now, here's a fun fact for any of you Eagles fans. 1979 was the last time the Eagles drafted a linebacker in the 1st round. That was Jerry Robinson out of UCLA. So I'm telling you right now, the chances of the Eagles drafting a linebacker in the 1st round are very, very slim. Maybe even the 2nd round slim. So my thought is this provides a lot of really solidifies the position. They have Sean Bradley as a backup. I think this is a good move by the Eagles, and I really liked this move. In addition, the Eagles announced on Friday that they were signing safety Terrell Edmunds, the former 1st-round pick out of Virginia Tech, who had spent the last 5 years playing safety for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Right now, it looks like if the season started today, Edmunds would be taking snaps alongside 2nd-year player Reed Blankenship. Now, Reed Blankenship filled in relatively admirably for C.J. Gardner-Johnson last year when he was hurt. But, he is still a 2nd-year player, and I don't know if the Eagles are going to put all their eggs in the basket of we think Reed Blankenship is going to take the step to the next level. However, I will say this, that it has been since 2002 that the Eagles have drafted a defensive back, and that defensive back was Lito Shepherd in the 1st round from the University of Florida. So the difficult part about that is it's been 21 years since the Eagles have drafted a defensive back in the 1st round. I still think that there's a chance that the Eagles defensive back, Avonte Maddox, could go to safety and Greedy Williams could fill in that slot corner role. But either way, my thought is this. The Eagles don't draft a safety in the 1st round like I initially thought, even as early as as late as last week. I thought potentially they draft a safety in the late 1st round. I don't think they draft a safety. I think they maybe could look for an in-season trade or potentially a trade before the draft for some low-level draft picks. I know the tight end safety has been looking for an out as well, and that could potentially be an option. But right now, I do not have them drafting someone in the 1st round. Moving on to topic number 3. Now, this is probably one of the most exciting topics that I've been looking forward to talking about this week, is the topic of the NFL draft outlook. Now, I will say this is not going to be the last time I do an NFL mock draft. I will preface this by saying this mock draft that I have, that is the top 10 mock draft, does not have any trades that haven't happened already. So I am probably going to do a mock draft in the coming weeks with one of my guests on a show, and I want to save a full 32 pick mock draft for the guests on the show. And I'm doing a top 10 mock draft with no trades. I can tell you right now, I will have some trades in that top 10 in that draft discussion in a few weeks. So, as of right now, as it stands, as of today, the NFL's top 10 draft order is number 1, Carolina Panthers, number 2, Houston Texans, number 3, Arizona Cardinals. At 4, Indianapolis Colts. At 5, Seattle Seahawks. At 6, Detroit Lions. Coming in at 7, you've got the Las Vegas Raiders. At 8, the Atlanta Falcons. Number 9, Chicago Bears. And number 10, my very own Philadelphia Eagles. So, as of right now, I have number 1, the Carolina Panthers picking C.J. Stroud, quarterback out of Ohio State. Now, I don't think this is a controversial pick, but I do believe that the Carolina Panthers, even now, are looking and listening to trade back out of the first pick. Not because they regret their move, but because they could potentially force a team who is high on C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young to make the move to trade ahead of them to ensure that they get the quarterback they want. At number 2, I have the Houston Texans picking Bryce Young, quarterback out of Alabama. Ultimately, I believe Bryce Young is probably the most NFL ready. His size definitely scares me, even though he is excellent at maneuvering in the pocket. I think that the Houston Texans are enamored by Bryce Young, and I think that he is number 1 on their draft board. So I don't see this as a surprise here. And at number 3, another pick that is not a surprise. I've got the Arizona Cardinals picking Will Anderson, the edge out of Alabama. He's probably, arguably, he and Jalen Carter were the 2 best athletes coming out of college this year because of character issues that have surfaced around Jalen Carter. I have Will Anderson going ahead of him, and the Arizona Cardinals are a perfect fit. At number 4, I have the Indianapolis Colts picking, you got it, Anthony Richardson, quarterback out of Florida. I think that this is a great pick for the Colts, being that Shane Steichen was one of the many reasons why Jalen Hurts progressed in the 2 years that he was with him. I like this pick a lot. I think Steichen can run a very similar system that he ran with Hurts with Anthony Richardson, and who knows, maybe Richardson, even though he's very green, can even win them a playoff game this year. I really think that Richardson has potential with the right coaching, and Steichen could not be a better coach for him. Coming in at number 5, I've got the Seattle Seahawks. Now, this is an interesting one because ultimately I probably would have 5 weeks ago picked Jalen Carter. But I have Tyree Wilson, the edge out of Texas Tech, going to Seattle. Even though I have Seattle getting a defensive end in the free agency period, as I discussed earlier, that I have them potentially pursuing someone like edge Jadeveon Clowney, like edge Frank Clark, or like edge Yannick Ngakoue, which is the guy who I thought would go to Seattle. I still think Seattle picks a guy who is a very good defensive end. And I think ultimately, coming out of Texas Tech, I think Wilson will provide immediate impact and could potentially not play as much in the first year while learning how to work in the NFL. At number 6, I've got the Detroit Lions picking a very interesting pick here, Devon Witherspoon, the cornerback out of Illinois. I initially had him going to the Philadelphia Eagles prior to the Eagles locking up Slay and Bradbury, but I have him going to the Detroit Lions. Even though they went out and they got 2 defensive backs this year, I still think adding another star defensive back would be in the Lions' best interest, being that their defense struggled so mightily last year. Now, they could very well go with a guy like Jalen Carter. I wouldn't be surprised if they did, but I still think because of the issues surrounding his character, Carter is going to slip, and it could be that Carter slips out of the top 10. But that's a possibility. I'm not quite sure if that will happen. At number 7, I've got the Las Vegas Raiders strengthening a position of need. Ultimately, I think 6 and 7 could alternate, where 6, the Detroit Lions get Christian Gonzalez, cornerback out of Oregon. But I have him going to number 7 to the Las Vegas Raiders. I have them picking, yes, as I said, Christian Gonzalez cornerback out of Oregon. And I think this strengthens a position of need. Let's put it this way. That division is so loaded with receivers from Mike Williams and the name is slipping me, but Mike Williams and the opposite Mike Williams on the Chargers team, Keenan Allen. There you go. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen on the Chargers. You've got Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, and T. Higgins on the Bengals. You've got, sorry, not the Bengals. I didn't mean to say Bengals. You've got Keenan Allen and Mike Williams on the Chargers. When moving to the Broncos, you've got Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, with KJ Hamler as well. Moving to the Chiefs, you've got tight end, Travis Kelce, sorry. And then you've got, receivers, Sky Moore. You've got some receivers. I know they're bringing in some receivers. That is an offensive driven division. And if you're going to go to, as far as the AFC goes, like I said, you've got the Bengals receivers. You've got other talented receivers. I would say arguably if you took a poll, the AFC probably has more talent on a receiver scale than the NFC does. And so, I would be safe to say that would be a good pick for the Las Vegas Raiders. Moving on to pick number 8. This is an exciting one because I really think that he stays home and the Atlanta Falcons pick Jalen Carter, defensive lineman out of Georgia. Now, I said this before. I really think that Jalen Carter could slip out of the top 10. And, of course, it's very interesting because the first 4 picks, 3 of them were quarterbacks in this draft, in my first top 10 mock draft. I really could see so many talented guys that could have gone in the first 4 picks slip out. And, now with Jalen Carter, that's just yet another talented player that potentially sneaks into the top 10 that teams get a chance to pick just because, top 15 because Jalen Carter typically probably would have gone in the first 5 picks. But now, a teams 10 through 15 could very well have a chance of getting arguably one of the best defensive players in the NFL draft. The only question is, can they look past his character issues, and are they as concerning as the media and as the reports are saying? Moving on as number 9, and this one's an interesting one because I could see number 9 and number 10 switching, but I have the Chicago Bears strengthening their offensive lineman and getting arguably one of the best linemen in the draft in Paris Johnson, offensive tackle out of Ohio State. I think this helps strengthen a position in need for Justin Fields and the Bears. They desperately need to protect their quarterback who was running way too much last year. Whether people like it or not, he needs to learn to sit back in the pocket and use his legs only when he absolutely needs to, because the thing is that's what's going to make him special, is that teams may not scheme for his legs, but he's going to make them pay with his legs. Whereas last year, it seems like all he was doing was running. And part of that was because he lacked a true wide receiver 1, which the Bears have done a good job in getting in DJ Moore, but he also lacked the offensive line help. And I think Paris Johnson solidifies a very, 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 very big need for the Chicago Bears. Now, number 10, I have the Philadelphia Eagles picking edge out of Iowa, Lucas Van Ness. I could also see them going with Myles Murphy as well. He is defensive lineman or defensive end out of out of Clemson. I have them going either of those 2 guys, but I also, if Paris Johnson were to slip, I could see them picking Paris Johnson. The Eagles want to pick in the trenches, and that's one of the reasons why I had doubts about them picking a cornerback or defensive back or a receiver or any of these people before picking a defensive lineman or offensive lineman. The Eagles have historically picked players in the trenches on both the defensive and offensive side of the board, and I don't think that changes this year in this pick with Lucas Van Ness. So that is my top 10 picks. I hope you guys enjoyed that topic. I'm really excited to go even into more depth in future episodes on this as we lead up to the NFL draft, which is quickly approaching. Moving on to topic number 4. Now, this is a fun one because I know the last 2 weeks I've spoken a lot about football, but this one is even more interesting. It's where I dive into other sports, which in this case is the NBA, focusing on topic number 4, 76ers remaining schedule overview. Now, the Philadelphia 76ers unfortunately have lost 2 road games. This was part of a pretty brutal road game stretch, which involved the Chicago Bulls, the Golden State Warriors, the Phoenix Suns, and the Denver Nuggets. Unfortunately, they've not played these games. They played these games without their star James Harden, and now it's looking like they're going to be playing tonight's game against the Denver Nuggets. It's looking like it was confirmed today, a couple hours ago, that Joel Embiid was ruled out for tonight's game against the Denver Nuggets in Denver due to a calf injury and probably for also rest for the playoffs. Now, he's been on an absolute scoring tear lately, so this does not affect the MVP race, but when I posted on Sunday that this would be the deciding factor in who the NBA's MVP was this year between Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid, the truth is there is a real chance that Jokic just goes completely off in this game. And if he does that maybe get him ahead of, this is the difficult part, is does this get him ahead of Joel Embiid in the rankings? I don't think so. I think ultimately it's really going to boil down to who decides to how the 76ers decide to defend Nikola Jokic. If he gets shut down tonight, I think that could actually benefit Joel Embiid more than it could hurt Joel Embiid if he absolutely goes off. Now, I will say this. I'm looking as we speak right now, and it looks like there's a chance that they left the door open for Harden to return during this road game stretch, but I think right now it's looking like he is questionable for tonight. They take on, it looks like he's definitely a very big possibility. They were hoping he was going to return, but he's questionable for tonight's matchup. So I would say if they don't have Harden or Joel Embiid, it's going to be very difficult to be able to win. But I think they can pull it out if they play good defense. But yeah, ultimately Jokic is on an absolute tear as well, and that's why they're the two best, some of the two best players. He is one of the two best players in the NBA right now. It's going to be a very, very interesting. It's going to be an interesting game focusing on that matchup and the lack thereof now that Joel Embiid is out. So what I had said in my weekly news sports report was, are the 76ers in risk of missing out on the number one seed in the Eastern Conference with 8 games left to play? Now here's the deal. I think right now, yes. The answer is yes. 4 games out of the first. Currently, there are 4 games behind the Milwaukee Bucks for the first seed with 8 games left to play. That means that they would have to win they really would basically have to win at minimum 6. If the Bucks win out, they would have to win 4 of the next 8. If the Bucks lose out, they would have to win 4 of the next 8. If the Bucks win of the next 8 games 3, they would have to win 7. So to answer your question, I think they're out of the first seed. Now this is where it gets interesting though. They're 2.5 games out of second place versus the second place, and the Boston Celtics currently hold the second place in the Eastern Conference. Personally, as a fan, I'd rather play currently the Nets at number 6 than going to the second seed and playing the Heat at number 7. However, the way it looks right now, of course, that could all change in the coming 8 games. So, and NBA teams don't focus like fans do. So right now, I think it's in the 76ers' best interest to try to get the Boston Celtics surpass the Boston Celtics in rankings. And they're going to have to do that by winning 2.5 games more than the Boston Celtics. Now, they do play them, and so, it's going to be interesting to see how this works out. There is a real path for them to finish second place, but it ultimately depends on who is healthy. So I have their remaining schedule right now is the Denver Nuggets, the Mavericks, the Raptors, the Bucks, the Celtics, the Heat, the Hawks, and the Nets. I have them going 5-3. If I were to pick right now, I would say lose tonight against the Nuggets due to the fact that they're probably missing 2 of their starters. I think they win against the Mavericks. They win against the Raptors. They win against the Bucks. They lose against the Celtics. They're going to win against the Heat. And they're going to win against the Hawks or the Nets. And I could also see them losing against the Bucks and the Celtics and winning against the Mavericks, the Raptors, the Heat, the Hawks, and the Nets. Either way, I have them going 5-3 because I think they're going to rest some starters. This is the bottom line. Yes, they want to place high in the standings, and they want to place high as an overall seed, but they also have to think about the long-term goal. And the long-term goal is they want to progress deep into the playoffs. And if they want to progress deep into the playoffs, they need to make fundamentally sound decisions when it comes to resting their starters. You cannot play the game of, well, Joel Embiid's ego is so high that we want to make sure he's on the court every night because we want him to win MVP. I want him to win MVP as well, but guess what? I'd rather them win a championship. And I think while Embiid wants to win MVP, I think he also wants to win a championship more. So that is an interesting situation and an interesting scenario as we look over the next 8 games. They play the Nuggets in just a couple of hours while as this show is being filmed. It's not long before they take them on. If they somehow pull out a win tonight and shut down Jokic, I really think there's a chance they get that second seed, and there is a slight chance they get that first seed. But it would start with, obviously the Bucks lost yesterday, but they're going to have to lose a lot more games in order for the 76ers to catch up. Moving on to the final topic today. Now, this is a really exciting topic because I typically, in the last 4 episodes, have not branched outside of the NBA or the NFL. But today, coming at you for topic number 5, I am going to discuss the European Soccer Cup discussion. So, for any of my listeners who don't know a whole lot about soccer, let alone international soccer, the 2024 European Cup soccer qualifying matches are underway, and the Netherlands men's soccer team has been chosen for Group B. So how it works is every 4 years the World Cup takes place, and every 4 years the Euro Cup takes place. So technically every 2 years either the European Cup or the World Cup takes place. And of course the North American and South American and Central American teams have another cup as well that's sprinkled in between those cups as well. But the European Soccer Cup is typically a pretty prestigious award, something that the Netherlands have won before, but it's been a long, long time. And they are currently in the qualifying matches to qualify for the group stages for the European Cup. So the qualifying matches there's a total of 10 qualifying matches, and right now they're in a group with France, Greece, Ireland, and Gibraltar. So ultimately, if anyone has followed any type of international soccer, the Netherlands lost a gut-wrenching quarterfinals loss in the World Cup to now champions Argentina. Of course, it was super focused on by the media. Of course, Lionel Messi goes on to win his first World Cup and solidifies his status as the greatest of all time when it comes to player. But right after their loss to Argentina in the quarterfinals, Dutch then head coach, Louis van Gaal, stepped down as manager for the team. And I will say this was expected because it was announced last year around this time that he was going to step down after the World Cup. So we already knew that they were going to be on the search for a new head coach. They appointed their head coach in the fall. Prior to Van Gaal stepping down, they appointed head coach Ronald Koeman early on, way before Van Gaal stepped down. And Koeman now has actually spent a previous stint with the Netherlands as their coach, and he helped them qualify for the Euro Cup in 2021, as well as brought them to the Nation League finals, defeating England in the semis during the inaugural Nations League season. So during his first stint with the Netherlands, they achieved some impressive stuff. They qualified for their first major tournament in a while. They qualified for the Nation League in the Nation League's inaugural season. They went all the way to the finals and lost, unfortunately, to Portugal, but beat England along the way. And a lot of people, including myself, was really excited. I really thought Koeman had brought back the fire that was lacking in the previous coaches. All to find out after all of this stuff, prior to the start of the 2021 European Cup, all of a sudden, unfortunately, he steps down and takes the head coaching position with Barcelona. During his time with Barcelona in the La Liga, he struggled tremendously and was actually sacked early on and was replaced very quickly. And when he was sacked, I was disappointed for him because I really think he did a lot of good stuff for the Netherlands. But like I said, just like I always say, just because a coach is good for a national team doesn't mean they can handle the egos of a club team. It's so much different. And I had a lot of hope when they re-signed Koeman as for his second stint until the absolute woeful thrashing by the French national team, raising some serious questions on whether he was capable of even leading a star-studded Dutch team to victory. Now, here's the deal. They lost badly on Friday. And when they lost this past Friday to France 4-0, I was pissed because the reality of this is the Dutch team is star-studded. And I expected them to at least put up a fight. Now, the French team did make it to the finals and lost in penalties to Argentina in the World Cup this past year. But the Dutch team, I felt like, could go march for march with them, and I was dreadfully wrong. Part of this was because they were missing some serious starters that they had in the World Cup. They were missing central back Matthias de Ligt. They were missing central midfielder, who is arguably one of the best midfielders in the world, and Frankie de Jong, De Ligt due to a virus that broke out right before the start of the game against the French national team. De Jong was missing due to injury. Cody Gakpo, their central attacking midfielder, who also played a false nine and a striker alongside Memphis Depay. He was missing due to the virus outbreak that De Ligt was struggling with. And finally, Steven Bergwijn, who has played right winger for the Dutch in the World Cup. He was also missing due to injury. So they were missing 4 very, very key starters that they had in the World Cup. And I knew that was going to definitely leave them handicapped. Not handicapped enough for a 4-0 thrashing, though, to the French national team. So today, thankfully, earlier, right before filming the show, the Netherlands did manage to beat Gibraltar, as expected, 3-0. The statistics for this game were 51 shots on goal, 12 shots on target. They had 6 times more passes than Gibraltar and 87% possession. However, as I stated, this all should have been expected versus a country like Gibraltar. It's a tiny country with very little top quality players, if any, and I expected them to thrash Gibraltar. Really, because the truth is, in 2021, they beat Gibraltar both 7-0 and 6-0. The last 2 times they played them, they absolutely thrashed them. I expected something more along the likes of 5-0. Now, with 51 shots, you would have thought at least more than 3 goals go in, right? Well, they at least had 12 shots on target, right? Well, I caught the final 10 minutes of the game, and they had 4 shots in a period of 10 minutes, 3 or 4 shots, and all of them were direct headers to the goalkeeper. So, yes, 51 shots is incredible, but the team we saw against France, who was a much better side and much better form, was abysmal. And I'm not convinced after the win against Gibraltar that they've somehow turned it around in 3 days. Now, they play Croatia in the semifinals of the Nation League in June, and then they kick back up in September and October the Euro Cup qualifiers. So it remains to be seen whether Koeman can turn it around, but it's going to be very interesting playing a very good Croatian team in June, and it's hard to know who will show up. Will the team that put up a really big fight against Argentina show up, or will the team that put on an absolutely abysmal performance against the French national team this past Friday show up? And it remains to be seen. What I know is this. The Netherlands have a standard, and if Koeman doesn't meet those standards, he is going to get sacked relatively quickly. They're going to fire him quickly. Frank de Boer had a pretty abysmal run with the Dutch national team. I think because of COVID, they gave him a little bit more grace, but ultimately, Frank de Boer really disappointed. When Louis van Gaal took over, he changed the dynamic of that team and really set the standard again for what a good Dutch coach is. Well, now that Koeman took over and he sort of had a so-so start, in fact, a relatively awful start in the eyes of many fans, it's very interesting to see how quickly the Netherlands will make a decision on their coach. My opinion is if he loses against Croatia and then proceeds to lose against either Greece or Ireland in their starting Euro Cup matches when they kick it back up in September and October, my thought is they're probably going to fire him, because the sooner they fire him, the Euro Cup is not this summer but next summer. They've got to get figured out very quickly who their coach is, because they need to be able to install a system and not install something right before the Euro Cup. And that's unfortunately what happened with Frank de Boer. De Boer, who was the coach before Louis van Gaal, he unfortunately basically was good enough just to get them to Euro Cup, and no fan liked him. And because he was pretty poor going into the Euro Cup, right before going into the Euro Cup, they didn't have a chance to fire him. And so we ended up going into the Euro Cup, and in my opinion, we sort of got caught with our pants down. It was just an absolutely terrible performance and just awful looking Dutch soccer. And Louis van Gaal just installed such a beautiful form of Dutch soccer, even though he doesn't play the standard 4-3-3 formation, he plays a 5-3-2. It was still a very, very beautiful style of soccer. And so that is my analysis of the Dutch national team. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's definitely straying far away from my typical NBA and NFL conversations, but for anybody who likes soccer, this is a very exciting topic for me to discuss, and I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Again, I would like to say, as I close this show, a big thank you to all of my supporters. Thank you for supporting me on all social media platforms. If you've not done so already, please give me a follow on TikTok at the Long John Podcast, on Instagram at the Long John Podcast as well. You can follow me on my YouTube channel at the Long John Podcast, as well as follow me and like my posts on Twitter at the Long John Pod. So, as I'm signing off here, again, a big thank you to all of the people who have tuned into my show over the last 4 episodes. Buckle up, because this next month is going to be really exciting with some incredibly exciting guests on the show, and I am really looking forward to producing some more quality content for you guys. As always, signing off, your host, Joseph Camperman. Until next time, peace.